All right.
Cool.
Welcome everyone to the Growing Up in Science second online open forum. My name is Yael. I'm from NYU. Joining me are Professor Yael from Princeton and Celia from UC Berkeley. We're trying for the first time this webinar format, so please let us know in the chat if anything is going wrong technically. You can't see each other right now, I think, but we have 152 participants at the moment, so thank you all for coming. It's obviously a topic today that resonates broadly with lots of academics these days, both pre and during pandemic. So I think, Yael, you were going to do some introductions, or how shall we do that? I can do the introductions.
Should we each introduce ourselves? I'm not sure how you want to do it.
Yeah, so maybe we will do that. So go ahead, Yael.
So yeah, so I have been researching neuroscience and psychology for 12 years now at Princeton. I was a postdoc for a very short period of time at Princeton as well before that, and prior to that was a graduate student formally in Israel, informally, or my secondary advisor and part of my research was done in London at the Gatsby Computational Neuroscience unit, and I study learning and decision making, and I've been running a Growing Up in Science series, or part of running a Growing Up in Science series at Princeton, inspired by Weiji's first seminar that he gave in at Princeton. And I was also on the first open online forum a couple of weeks ago.
Thank you so much, Yael. Celia?
Hi, yeah, I'm Celia. I use she, her pronouns. I am a third-year grad student at UC Berkeley in their neuroscience program. I also study learning and decision-making in non-human primates. And let's see what other information. I went to Brown University for my undergrad and studied cognitive neuroscience there. And I have not been previously involved in the Growing Up in Science series, but Weiji kind of scooped me up after seeing a sad tweet that I posted a couple weeks ago. And I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you all, because I think that, feelings of apathy in science are probably a universal experience, but we rarely talk about it.
Wonderful, thank you so much, Celia. So a little bit of background on the series. Growing Up in Science is a place for academic scientists to reflect on life as a scientist, on struggles, failures, insecurities, academic practice and malpractice. As Yael was already saying, the series has also been replicated at many institutions. If you're interested in starting your own local, whatever local means these days, series, definitely come talk to me. Usually we have a single speaker telling their life and career story. We will have a few events like that in the future, but today we're having an open forum and in fact around a single topic. Thanks to everybody who submitted questions in response to the earlier calls. You can continue to submit questions for future forums. And the submission link is on the website. So today we'll address a single topic that's relevant to the pandemic, much broader than that, namely feelings of apathy towards research. The logistical details. If you have a question or comment based on what we're saying today, please use the Q&A button. Can you raise your hand if you see the Q&A button? Then yeah, right, perfect, good. So we'll be monitoring that window, and we'll try to get to as many questions and comments as we can. If you want to chat amongst yourself, feel free to, but we ask that you use the chat for that so that the Q&A doesn't get overwhelmed. You can absolutely contribute anonymously, so you can go to participants, select your own name, and then rename yourself. But one request, if you rename yourselves Anon or Anonymous, then add some random digits at the end so that we can distinguish between different anonymous contributors. And you can respond to each other more specifically. Celia is going to introduce the topic for today.
Great, thanks. Yeah, so again, this, if you found the link to this seminar on Twitter, then you probably already saw the original shortened version of this. But the question that I guess we're posing today is whether anyone is struggling with feelings of apathy towards their work. And then also whether those feelings existed before the quarantine began, or whether they're just cropping up now as a result of your research changing during this pandemic. So many scientists outwardly project a level of unbridled enthusiasm for their work, and I personally am afraid that I haven't felt that way in a while, right? And I know that I love science. It drove me to apply to grad school. I love to read about science, but recently I've felt like my research is either meaningless or uninteresting or both. Of course, these feelings have been amplified by the pandemic. Why bother with my already probably meaningless research when I could be applying my skills to something immediately useful? I feel like this has been amplified by spending a lot of time reading the news or listening to news podcasts. I feel like I should be dropping everything to start 3D printing ventilators or pitching to national media outlets. Like, why am I sitting in lab training monkeys to play video games when I could be doing so much more?
You're muted. Wait.
You're muted, yeah.
Right. Good.
Zoom
yeah.
problems.
So, Yael, do you want to take a first pass at these questions, these complex questions?
Sure. So we're devoting the whole hour today, or whatever's left of it, 45 minutes, to this. So there's a lot to say, but I can start with a few thoughts. I was thinking about it this morning as kind of the three-part answer is, gosh, and I now can't remember the three parts, but basically there's a part of looking into kind of talking to ourselves and being aware and collecting information from what our feelings give us. The second part is contextualizing that. And the third part is thinking big. So let me just briefly say something about each of these. So I think we have different people, we're all going through different times now because of COVID, but even in general, in the long training process, in the long careers that we have, there are times that we'll be more or less interested in our research. And that is a signal that's important to listen to, but also important to contextualize in terms of what else is it accompanying? So is it, how temporary is it? So well, let me say something more general. Are you feeling apathetic about everything right now? So if you're feeling apathetic about your work, but also about lots of other things, that's a, it's a meaningful signal about mental health, and it's a meaningful signal about what we're going through right now, especially with different times in COVID and social distancing, and a lot of the structure that we're used to and the feedback that we're used to getting and the socializing that we maybe didn't think was that important for us. We find that without it, nothing else has that much meaning, and that's okay. These are not normal times, and even though they seem like they're taking forever, it will not always be like this. So you can, it's an important signal for your own well-being and to think about what you can do to feel better, but it's probably not a signal about your career choices. But then, unrelated to COVID-19 and to social distancing, you might have times in which you feel apathetic towards your research. And there the contextualizing is, is this temporary right now because my research, I've been slogging on this experiment and it's not succeeding, et cetera. Or is it something bigger about, have I been feeling like this about everything that I'm doing, only at work? So then is my project, is my topic not interesting for me, or is my lab not a great environment for me to work in, or my institution not a great environment for me to work in, kind of trying to understand what is the source of this feeling. And another issue of contextualizing is understanding that it's totally normal to feel like this. I think, Celia, you said that, you know, a lot of people project this aura of like they have unbridled enthusiasm for their work. I think there are so many reasons, there are lots of differences between people with regards to why we do our work. I mean, some people, I've thought about this, some people, it just feels like, you know, they are so driven, like they're so driven, I don't know, to get the Nobel Prize. I'm not in it for a Nobel Prize personally. Like, you know, so some people, they're doing the science with this huge ambition to be the first and only to figure out something really big. That's fine. It's great that some people are like that. Not everybody is like that. Some people are just like totally devoted to the specific question. They're just so interested in like figuring out that thing about the brain. And again, I feel like I'm interested in the brain. Curiosity is what brought me to what I'm doing, but it's not like, you know, this is the end all for me. I like my job, but it's not like, you know, I don't know. I like a lot of things about my job. I like the people that I work with, maybe a little bit more than the neuroscience in some cases. You know, that I'm very curious about about the brain, but I could be curious about other things too. I like lots of things about my job, but it's not that the neuroscience itself is the only thing that drives me. Which is to say, if I feel apathetic about some of the research questions at different times, that doesn't mean I'm in the wrong job. So. Or for me, it doesn't mean that. So that's what I'm saying, like, you know, listening to that signal, but then trying to understand, is it telling me something about being in the wrong place or being in the wrong job, or is it temporary, or is it, you know, what's going on in the world? And especially this idea of comparing ourselves to others and thinking, if I'm not 100% interested in everything that I do every single day, then I'm a bad person. That's definitely not the case. I know lots of people who have in their academic career or outside their academic career changed research questions, and you can see kind of, or changed careers completely, and you can see the difference. So one of my PhD advisors had studied the basal ganglia before. Her name is Daphne Joel. She studied the basal ganglia and OCD in basal ganglia and cortex, etc., and was really good at it. And then one day, or it wasn't one day, over a couple of years, she basically changed her area of research to gender differences in the brain. And I look at her, and she's a good friend, and we're still in touch all these years. And I look at her and I see the difference, how she was a very good scientist before, but it felt like she was doing the science well, because that's how you do science. Whereas now it's really like a passion, like she's doing it because she really wants to send a message to the world. So about, you know, these findings are really personally important for her. So what I'm saying is, you could be a great scientist without it being a personally important question to you, that, like, you know, this is the thing that really is the enthusiasm about the research question is what's driving your everyday. But that's also something that you can change. So when you find that you're apathetic about your work, and if it's a real signal if it's a signal that's not about the fact that we have COVID right now and we just have to wait for that to end, then the third part is, you know, find out what is and think big. What can you do about it? And are you in the right job? Like, if you really do not like what you're doing, I know it's really scary because we have a lot of sunk costs, etc., but pretty much everybody that I've seen that has changed careers is happier after the change. And changing career doesn't have to be, it could be within academia. So people who have really changed what they research, it could be leaving academia, it could be, you know, all kinds of things. I have many examples. Some of them didn't start as academics and didn't end up as academics. I'm just saying, life is too short to do something that you really don't want to do. But also there's this romanticizing of like what we do has to be fun and super interesting and super motivating every single day. That's not going to happen either. So kind of like, I think it's really important to try to understand that. That's where the contextualizing comes in. Try to understand, are my expectations too high? Therefore, every little slump, I'm like, oh my God, this is probably not for me. I should leave, or like, I'm not good at this. I'm not driven like everybody else. That's okay. Everybody has those slumps. Or am I really like doing something that I started doing for some reason, but it just, that reason is not there anymore. And I'm just not enjoying it at all. And then don't be afraid to say that to yourself too. So there's kind of no magic answer here, but I think on the one hand, this is normal. On the other hand, you don't have to satisfy. Like if it continues for very long, then what else do you want to do?
Thank you so much, Yael. Yeah, so I personally recognize a lot of what both of you are saying, Celia and Yael. So I actually started out in theoretical physics, and as a grad student in that field, I had a lot of feelings of apathy towards my research. I had entered physics with great ambitions and great interest in very fundamental questions, but then when it came down to actually doing the daily work, it always felt extremely small and meaningless to me. And I mean that in two different ways. So one is that I always felt that the specific thing that I was working on was only a tiny part of the puzzle, and between the grand question that we were trying to answer and what I was actually doing, there was such a huge gulf that I could really not see how my work could ever become important. And then the second part is that even the big question itself never felt very useful for society, and that's something I've always struggled with. So I also was at the same time active in lots of organizations, like political organizations, and I would, for example, organize political debates about education systems and political issues of that day in the Netherlands. I also cared a lot about the environment, and all of those things, they seemed much more pressing, much more urgent, much more important to actually work on. And even though we all talk about how science is helping people, it's very often very indirect, and I really couldn't see any relationship. Now, theoretical physics is also a really extreme field, so I think in many parts of psychology and neuroscience that is a lot better. But the upshot of it was that I felt so apathetic about research that I actually stopped working almost altogether. I remember this incident in grad school where I was so much on the phone with people to invite for the debates I was organizing that my office mate threatened to disconnect the phone because he was actually trying to work. And for me, that was sort of an escape route, because like organizing debates, that's something that felt much more relevant. It also was much more instantaneously rewarding, right? You get somebody to speak, people come, they like what they hear, and that's an instant gratification signal. And I didn't get that from my research. Then after my PhD, I switched fields. So that's Yael, with pretty much what you're saying. That's I made a really hard break from physics, and I went into neuroscience, a pretty common transition. Some things got better there, and it felt that this was a field that is much closer to the human experience, and I could see areas where the link to society is much more direct than in theoretical physics. But at the same time, it was still the case that the specific problems I was working on as a postdoc in computational neuroscience, they were very abstract and esoteric, and very few people would be interested in them, and I could never motivate myself for them. So my first postdoc, Christoph Koch, was super enthusiastic about building this neural model for this illusion, and I sort of went along with that to some extent, but then in my dark moments, I would say, what the fuck am I doing here? This is so completely unimportant here. Like, why am I wasting my time away here? So I've always had this sort of this split life where I would during the day try to keep a career up, and then in my free time try to do like nonprofit work or other things that I found more meaningful. So that dichotomy and that split and that discomfort didn't go away during my 6 years as a postdoc. I always felt like it's a bit embarrassing to admit this, but I sometimes even look down on people who were super invested in their research and thought that was the only important thing, because I felt the world is so much bigger and you should also care about all the other things, and research in the big picture is just not that important, right? And maybe it was sort of a self-justification mechanism where I had sort of the try to then derive my self-esteem from other things than research. I think the big change for me, besides changing fields, was actually becoming a PI. And that was actually a time when I started feeling less apathetic and less and more motivated for my work. And I think that's because of two reasons. So one is that as a PI, of course, you can do many more things. So you have the illusion that you're doing something bigger. Maybe it's more than an illusion, but you just have your hands in more pots. It feels more exciting. The rewards are still sort of delayed within a single project, but because you have multiple projects going on, the rewards do come at a higher rate. And also as a PI, I found it easier to do things that are more closely related to society, right? So you're more often invited to public talks or for an interview. I've also sort of broadened my scientific horizon, so I've learned more about, let's say, how developmental science can impact juvenile justice. It's a cause that I care a lot about. So if you then are a little bit broader than your own research, then suddenly your field might seem more societally relevant. So I think it's a combination of those three things that gradually helped me get out of that apathy. So changing something that I really didn't enjoy doing in the first place, the physics, then just growing more senior, just hanging in there for long enough, and then being very active in trying to find links between science and society.
I want to raise first a technical thing. I see that people are finding it hard to make themselves anonymous in the chat. I don't have a quick solution, but a slightly maybe more laborious solution is to connect again, like through the Zoom app, not just through the link. Like if you go to zoom.us, and there I think you get to set your name in the little dialog box. So if people want to comment anonymously and can't change their name, you could disconnect and connect again with a different name. I also wanted to raise, Weiji, a question that came up here, one in the chat and one in the Q&A. But I wanted first to just quickly comment on what you said, and also actually to give Celia a chance to talk before we go to the next question. So I just wanted to say about the issue of thinking more broadly about how your research is maybe important. I think that it doesn't have to be today or tomorrow. You know, if you're a graduate student, it's really hard to do these things in an immediate sense. Like even for faculty, you know, luckily we have a long career, so you can take kind of the longer view. But the idea of the longer view. So I recently said to that advisor that I talked about, I was saying to her how I see that her passionate, like now what she does, she's so much more passionate about it. And I feel like the things that there's some brewing things that are things that like for years I've been very interested in them. I said something like, you know, if I were doing the whole thing completely differently and I had a completely different career, this is what I would be doing. And she said, wait, so think about is there some way to think broadly and creatively about how your research can touch upon that? And so it could be through the research, because she said that's what happened to her. She didn't think she would be studying gender differences in the brain. She thought she would be studying, OCD and basal ganglia circuits. But then kind of you can make that opportunity happen to work on something that you're really, really interested in. And it might take a long time, and people do this, maybe after tenure, et cetera, but it's not that long. It seems forever, but it's not that long. Many people change their areas of interest after tenure. Many people, I don't think it's because of tenure. I think it's because 5-6 years of doing something, often after that, we're a little bit tired of it. So at the end of your PhD is a good time to think, wait, now is a time where I can inject something different. It doesn't have to be a career change completely like Weiji did, and a complete area of research, but how can I inject? So I have people in my lab who are very interested in social psychology and social neuroscience. So here's a chance to go to a more social neuroscience oriented lab after leaving my cognitive neuroscience lab. Or, and then again, after your PhD, your postdoc, of course, when you're creating your own lab, you have a chance to inject something even more different. And it's like every 5-6 years, there's this chance, and it's maybe not a coincidence that the grants that we apply for are 5-year grants. Because like after 5 years, you're like, okay, now what's the next thing? And the next thing each time you can put in something different. And the other thing that I wanted to say about the romanticizing thing is that also kind of thinking that one source of one thing will give you everything that you need is, I think, a kind of romantic mistake. It's true also with our romantic partners, right? Thinking that you'll get everything that you need from one person is kind of a recipe for disaster. I think the same thing with our jobs and our research. So you could be a political activist on the side, or you could, volunteer and work with children, or do whatever other thing. Like, not everything has to be satisfied by our work and by our research.
Celia, do you want to respond?
Yes.
Yeah, so first of all, thank you so much for both of your feedback. This is really fun for me because I'm just like, oh, cool, like free official advice in front of an audience. This is awesome. But I think that we're really hitting upon like two different threads of thought. And I'm excited to dive more into the discussion with everybody because I can already see a lot of really interesting questions coming up in the chat. But it seems like on the one hand, there's this issue of, it feels like kind of this idea of being like passionately driven by a single research question that keeps you up at night is this like romanticized view of what doing science is that's maybe not accurate, and trying to hold yourself to that standard at whatever stage of your career you are as a scientist is like setting you up for disappointment. And that something that's important to do, like you were saying, Yael, is like being able to distinguish between do I feel apathetic and disappointed because I'm holding myself to these unrealistic standards, or are these apathy telling me something deeper about either my mental health or whether this is the right career for me, or a mix of both. And that's a whole interesting discussion itself. And then I think overlapping with that is this other issue that I see some people in the chat have brought up, and also like Weiji talked about a little more, which is that as a scientist, especially if you're in, I don't know, like I think that all three of us are kind of like computational neuroscience or computational neuroscience adjacent. And it can feel like the questions that you're asking when you're just like, I want to understand how like thinking and consciousness works can feel a bit esoteric, especially at a time like now where it seems like there's so many more immediately urgent problems that we could be applying our privilege and our ability to like rapidly interpret and communicate information. Like I personally feel like guilty that I'm not taking those skills elsewhere and doing more like organizing work to immediately solve one of the gazillion problems that are immediately like addressable right now. And so I think that that's a whole other like thread of conversation is like, what do you do in this specific time of crisis where we as academics are kind of like in this position of privilege to be doing something as scientists, and I don't know, like, how do we wrestle with those feelings? Is there a way that we can take action at different stages of our career? And yeah, so that's something that I'm also hoping to talk about once we open it up in a couple minutes, I think.
So a lot of people in the chat are resonating with what you said right now. And I think that's a really good point, that we can, especially now because many of us can't do our regular research, and we do have, and you know, we have the luxury of we're still being paid and we have all this expertise, so what can we do with it? And labs that are printing out, you know, 3D printing out PPE, and labs that are trying to develop cures and vaccinations, that's amazing. What do us computational neuroscientists have that can promote, you know, I'm not going to write a model of a PPE, that's not really going to work, but we do have expertise that, for instance, like you said, in communicating ideas. So even writing an op-ed to a local newspaper, explaining statistics, explaining why, what is a type 1 and type 2 error, and why these tests why people shouldn't test themselves if they don't have symptoms, why that makes sense, why, explaining epidemiology, because we know how to read papers in general and explain them to the public. I think trying to think of what skills we have that we can use to help the public, and even if it's just information, not protective equipment and not a vaccination, people are feeling so much uncertainty, and that is weighing on everybody's mental health. Just empowering them to understand better, I think is something that we could ask ourselves to do, and we could, you know, on our own or together with other people in the lab or other people that we know as scientists, just, you know, think about how can we help people, how can we help reassure people by empowering them through information and knowledge.
I'm going to give sort of an extension of that answer that is not pandemic related per se, because I don't think I have that much to say about that. But it is true that as scientists, almost regardless of field, we have a lot of skills that are generalizable and can be immediately put to good use outside of our immediate research, right? And I'm thinking of just reading papers, the ability to read a scientific paper. That's something that we take for granted, but it's really something that not a lot of non-scientists know how to do well. And then visualizing data, simple data analysis, these are things that we do on a daily basis, and sometimes we underestimate how useful those skills can be quite directly for social causes that we might care about. And so I'm really happy that I'm part of this group at NYU. It's called the Scientist Action and Advocacy Network. So what we do there is we partner with nonprofit organizations that need those skills. So one of our first projects was a campaign to help raise the age of criminal responsibility from 16 to 18 in New York State. And of course, that's a big moral issue, but it also has a scientific component, because that adolescent brains are not fully developed, and adolescents are more prone to peer pressure and taking risks in the presence of peers. And there's corresponding neuroscience to go with that. And so those kinds of facts were helpful for our nonprofit partner to push for legislation. And so what we did is we put together a fact sheet that could help them make the case in the state legislature, and eventually that passed, right? And we've worked on a bunch of other causes, solitary confinement, Miranda rights, environmental causes, like toxic waste sites in New York, plastic bag regulation. And I really am not an expert on any of those things, but as I'm saying, like, it's a way for us to use very generic skills that we have as scientists in a way that is very directly useful to push for like structural change. So sometimes you have to invent those opportunities yourself. They're not necessarily given to you, but I think that the possibility of the transfer of those skills definitely exists. I also wanted to address Anna Maria's question. How about finding the time to do these extra things when we all know how much time research requires? So that's a big one. So as I said, when I was a trainee, I was mostly doing this by the side, but also doing this during work hours. And I must admit that it actually set my research back. So I'm not going to go into the details of my scientific career here, but I wasn't particularly productive in my postdocs. And definitely nowadays that would not fly anymore. So you would have to do this in your free time, or you would have to have an advisor and a lab environment that's really encouraging of these kinds of outreach and broader impact type of initiatives. Now, I must say, like, funding agencies also really encourage this, right? NIH, NSF always have a section like, how is what you do relevant to society? And sometimes outreach and broader impact initiatives can easily fit into there. So it's something that is encouraged, although not necessarily always at your local scale. But I would hope that you would be able to find allies, right? If it's not your PI, then maybe other graduate students or the postdocs, organizations outside academia that you can partner up with. And I wouldn't personally, if my academic career would require that I would give up those kinds of initiatives, then I would probably not go for an academic career. It's just not worth it, right? Like it would feel too unbalanced. But that's my personal preference, I think.
I want to raise an issue that's coming up both in the chat and in the Q&A, which is the display of enthusiasm or excitement about research, both what to do when there's maybe you're excited about something, but your PI is not excited about something. So Weiji and I are talking as PIs who are sometimes not excited about part of our research, or just in general, it's about our poor students and postdocs might feel more excited than us in some cases. So what to do about that, and where to kind of, how to motivate yourself if you feel that your PI is not very excited specifically about your research question, for instance. And another question that came up in the chat is about cultural differences in displaying enthusiasm. And what if you feel a lot of enthusiasm internally, but still people say, oh, that person does not seem enthusiastic, I don't want to take them into my lab, etc. And I actually resonate with that from the side of, when I look for people for my lab, I want people who, you know, their eyes are sparkling, because it's just more fun to be around people who are enthusiastic about the questions that I'm studying. But then what if they are and I don't know? So I don't have great, I'm raising these questions, I don't have great answers for them. I thought maybe Weiji or Celia, you two can start and I can think and listen.
I guess I can just chime in on elaborating a bit more about what I personally feel like this like display of enthusiasm, like where that's coming from. I think because it's like I follow a lot of scientists on Twitter. I like listen to podcasts about science and like fun facts and things like that. And it feels like a lot of the people who are communicating science publicly, who are also professional researchers in some capacity, whether that means they're PIs or they work for like Genentech or something, they just seem so excited all the time. It's like this research question is like the one thing that gets me up in the morning, and I think about it all day, and when I go to bed I'm still thinking about it. And then as somebody who, I don't think I do that. Like I enjoy science and I like reading science papers and doing experiments, but I also have other interests, and I don't usually go to bed like haunted by thoughts of the orbitofrontal cortex or anything like that. And I think that because there is this, again, this kind of like romanticized notion of what being a scientist is, I think that a lot of like especially early career researchers, maybe this applies, throughout. I wouldn't know, as I'm not a PI. But yeah, I think that there's just this feeling that, like, if you are not 100% fascinated by everything that you do all the time, then you don't care enough. And that maybe, like, you're just not cut out for it. And I've heard that that kind of language being used by PIs, where there seems to be this notion, like, oh, well, like, if you're not driven enough to do this, then maybe you're just gonna get weeded out, and, like, maybe this isn't the path for you. And I think that is just tricky to deal with, because you don't know where that feeling of apathy is coming from necessarily. Like, you don't know if it's just because you're just broadly depressed, or if you are actually not that interested in what you're doing, or whether you're just at a stage of your research process that feels like a lot of slugging, which is always necessary. So I think that that's, I don't know that that answers any questions, but it, I guess, clarifies the feelings that I'm feeling, and that it looks like a lot of people in the chat are feeling as well.
Yeah, so from the PI point of view, I would say I'm looking for a willingness to work hard on the questions that that we are pursuing, right? And sometimes that includes questions that I was not thinking of and that the student or the postdoc brings themselves, right? I have several examples of people in my lab who actually dragged my research in direction that I had not foreseen, and that are turning out really well. So sometimes if you're lucky and you have a PI who's willing to sort of be flexible in project choice, you can actually create your own directions. At the same time, I also don't look for people who take themselves too seriously. And so like living for science is a negative for me, actually. If somebody just lives for science, I won't hire them. That seems to, I'm looking personally for people who are a little bit more well-rounded, and so often that includes being able to look at science with this mixture of awe and passion and hate and despair, and it's a complex mix of feelings. But I don't think that enthusiasm is the only thing that I would be looking for. Now, in response to the question of what do you do if you're not in an environment where you can pursue the questions that you are actually interested in, that was one of the Q&As. I would say two things. In the moment, you can perhaps find other PIs who are interested in that, right? So I've seen that a lot, that a student, especially if you're a little bit more advanced, you have maybe one paper under your belt, you get some freedom to do a bit more what you find interesting yourself. And if your main professor is not interested in that, maybe you can find somebody else, another PI or another postdoc to mentor you on that, or to work together, or maybe you can even do some of it completely by yourself. And the second answer is, and this is sort of an extension of what Yael was saying earlier, the times where you're actually independent might not be that far away. So what I always recommend is keep some kind of document where you list all your ideas, the things that you really want to do. It could be pretty worked out ideas, or it could be really random thoughts, and just look back at it every now and then. And sooner or later, you will be in a position where you can actually pick up some of those ideas, even if it's not immediately, because you're not in a position to control the research yet. But that doesn't mean that it's not going to be on the agenda in the relatively near future.
Yeah, so, I think, sorry, I just wanted to add, if you're interested in something and your professor is not interested in that, there are several. So what Weiji said is right. You might be able to find someone else who's interested in it. You might be able, it might drive you to think more about, why is this question interesting and how can I pitch it? I kind of feel like, and this is not true for all PIs, but for a lot of us, we are where we are because we're generally interested in science. So, and we're not only interested in like one narrow question. So so try a different pitch, right? Like if you can sell it to us, you can sell it later to reviewers and to, you know, other people in the field. If you really can't sell your question to anybody, then you really need to think, well, maybe they have some, maybe there's something right in what, you know, maybe this question, yes, it's really interesting, but it's to me, but if there's something problematic, I'm not making it concrete enough, I'm not, you know, if you can't sell a question to anybody, you do need to think twice about that. Either it's premature, it's too general, it's you're thinking about it in a way that doesn't resonate, which doesn't mean that it's wrong. You know, maybe you're ahead of your time by 15 years, that can happen. But if you can't sell it to your PI, it's going to be hard to sell it to other people too. And our science has to be communicated, or it's more valuable when it's communicated. You can sell it to someone who's not your PI, but I think if you really can't, you have to think of the other side as well, which is your PI is also investing a lot of time and effort in you. And you can't ask them to do something that they're totally not interested in. Like you wouldn't want them to ask you to do something that you're totally not interested in. So if you can't sell this idea, think of another idea that you're interested in. And again, the romanticizing, like, this might not be your 100%, it might be 90%, 80%, 70%, but something that you're also interested in. Because then the person that you're working with, you have to find something that both of you are interested in, because both of you are putting in a lot of time and effort, and nobody wants to do that for something that they're not interested in at all. And the other side of this is I have had more than once in my lab people who were interested in something but thought I wouldn't be interested in it. And so they kind of hid that. They were like, oh, we'll do your project. But I had remembered, and you know, this might have happened more than twice, and other times I didn't remember, but I can think of 2 cases where I came to a student and I said, well, you're interested in this and this, how about you do that? And they're like, oh, we thought you wouldn't want us to like research that. I'm like, hey, you know, I have no problem with it. And it turns out, you know, really interesting projects, etc. So what your PI is doing until now, you can assume that maybe they are also not so interested only in continuing the same thing that they've been doing until now. So it again goes to pitch it to them. Try to get them interested. If it doesn't work, think about it again. And if it does work, great, then you can do your idea. And maybe this sounds too optimistic, and surely it doesn't work with all PIs. And I know that Weiji and I here, we're very similar in our attitudes, so we're not representative of everybody for sure. Yeah, that's my 2 cents there. Celia?
Oh, yeah, well, I actually wanted to bring up another question that was in the Q&A, if we could do that. Just because it's related to this, but maybe more COVID specific. So I'm just gonna read it. This one was from an anonymous person. It says, one of the issues I've encountered with COVID is that I feel trapped. I can't do the experiments I plan. It's not clear when or if I'll be able to. I feel like I can't find a different job because hiring freezes, economic uncertainty. The work I'm doing right now is defined by what I can do during lockdown rather than what is interesting or important to work on. And it's not clear whether there's any value to it. I can work on personal development and skill building, which helps counterbalance the sense of uselessness, but it's hard to get away from the feeling of uselessness and guilt. So I just wanted to bring that up because I think it probably reflects things that a lot of people are feeling, specifically right now. So like zooming in from this broader discussion, where it's like, even if you are satisfied by your general research experience and you are interested in the questions that you're working on, what can you do in this moment where maybe your research progress has been completely upended? You know, you've had to stop maintaining an animal colony that you've been working with for a year, and yeah, like you can't just drop everything and pivot careers right now because there's nowhere to go. So I'm wondering, I don't really have any answers to this, but I know that a lot of my peers in my grad student cohort have been experiencing this, and I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this as PIs.
I would say my main answer to this is deep breath. This is temporary. As many people have been writing about privilege, we are privileged to still be, for the most part, many of us, I think, are still paid, even if we can't do our work. And if we're just doing, you know, what can I do right now? The right now is short in the large scale of things. And I think this is not a time to kind of think, why am I not getting the maximum out of every day? And a lot of it reminds me of having children. So young, when babies, like infants, when the real, this whole time really reminds me of that, the isolation, the feeling like every day takes forever, but then somehow the weeks pass really fast. But when someone says this is going to continue for another month, you think, oh my God, that sounds like 10 years. It was just like that, having a tiny baby. So just so you know, but it passes. It is really temporary. And when people say enjoy every moment, it's like, what are you talking about? Who's going to enjoy every moment of having an infant? At least I did not. It was, as long as you cannot suffer every moment, that is okay. So I think now too, like, don't make the most of every moment right now. This is just not the time to put such a high bar on anything that we do. This too shall pass. I mean, you know, it won't pass in a week or two. But we'll have a new normal, which will not be the old normal and will not be what it is right now. Right now, it's acute state. And we just need to wait patiently and get through it.
I will say that something that's been helping me is just reminding myself that it's not just me. It's like all of us are in the same boat. It's not like you specifically have had your research progress hindered. It's like you and literally everybody else across most fields is being disrupted in this way right now. And yeah, I totally agree. Like this is a really bad time to convince yourself that you're going to be hyper productive. I do feel like there's been a lot of messaging about that coming from, I don't know, Twitter and various internet people just saying like this, like, you should be learning new skills now and taking this time to like learn a new coding language and like publish a bunch of papers. And it's like, no, like we're literally in a time of crisis. I think it's unrealistic to expect that your productivity is going to be skyrocketing right now when you're kind of like constantly battling this like low, well, maybe high level. For me, it's like low level, but never ending anxiety. And it's just not possible to be at like top notch productivity in that state. And yeah, so I guess I just wanted to add that like that's what's been keeping me afloat, is just reminding myself that it's not just me, like literally everybody is in the same boat. And I don't need to expect myself to suddenly be like magically productive right now. And it's okay if my brain feels like it's a little bit broken sometimes.
An undergraduate student who's an athlete told me that when they practice, their coach says, all you need to do is win the day. Just win today, and tomorrow you start again and win tomorrow as well. And I actually wrote that on our whiteboard at home. Just win the day. No big picture right now.
So there is another question in the Q&A. Panelists, have you had the experience that having worked on a problem or theory for a while, it just starts feeling more trivial or more problematic? And after that point, it's hard to feel enthusiastic, and the only motivation, I need to get this done, thus I can start something new. I think it's a very common feeling. I've seen this a lot myself, and I've experienced this a lot myself. I've seen it a lot around me. My enthusiasm is often greatest when the idea is new and fresh and exciting and all possibilities are there. And then when you dig into the details, then things are not as simple, or somebody has done some variant of it, or it turns out to be a lot of work. And all of those things are sort of, they damp your enthusiasm. And this relates to the fact that reward is really delayed, right? This is, to stay with the sports metaphor, these are marathons, right? These projects, and 3 years is pretty common for a project in our field. So it's, I think, very common to really have to pull yourself up all the time as a project progresses. I often, and it's completely irrational, like when a project is very close to completion and I have to do the writing, then I dread that so much that I let it sit for months. And I just cannot make myself enthusiastic about it anymore, even though it's so close. And then, yes, what you're saying, I need to get it done so that I can do something new. Sometimes it becomes the biggest driver in actually finishing it. I mean, I think I'm also very stubborn. That helps. I don't want to give up on a project. So, but I definitely have overall a declining trend in enthusiasm as a project progresses. And that's almost independent of how many problems arise in its course.
Another question that came up here in the Q&A, how to tell apart that I lose interest in the question because of the question itself, or just because of the constant failure or unsatisfying results or incompetent self. Also, it's hard to tell when to stop pursuing a question or career. Persistence and stubbornness can be the same thing. Yeah, I think the stopping problem, if you know that problem from computer science, is like NP complete. We don't know when to stop any kind of search or any kind of problem, or you know, it's somewhat of an art, especially in science, to know like when is this project done and I should write the paper now, because there's always another analysis, another model, another this, another that. So that's not the question that you're asking, but I'm just saying, in general, it's hard to know when to stop pursuing a question because it's done or because it's never going to be done. I think, or because it's not interesting anymore. I think one way to think about it, I mean, I don't have an answer of how to know, but you can ask yourself at different times, what am I enjoying? Why am I doing this? So am I doing this because I already did all the rest, or am I doing this because I really think what I'm doing right now is going to solve this question? Or I'm doing this because I'm enjoying what I'm doing right now. And I guess, I think I shared this last time, I'm not sure. I was in the military in Israel, as most Israelis are. And there you can't leave when you just want to leave, because there's a compulsory time that you have to be in the military. And after that, that's really given me this feeling like I never want to do something without asking myself, do I want to do this? And I think that's true for a project too. And I've had students who, you know, ran 7 experiments, none of them succeeded. And then the student came and said, you know what? I think we're not going to make any headway with this question. Let's just leave it and do something completely different. And I just thought, oh my God, that is so much maturity, because that's probably right. It's not that the question, we did not manage to answer this question. Nothing that we did worked. And at some point you just move on. And so I think it's really important to ask, you know, is it worth staying here? Do I really want to continue doing what I'm doing? And if you don't want to do it, it doesn't matter that you've already done it for 7 experiments. I mean, it's privileged for sure, because that costs time and money, and you can't get that time back. But doing another 7 experiments will not help that, because then you'll have 14 experiments that didn't succeed to worry about. So I think just verifying that you're not doing things because of sunk costs. That's really my question. If you're doing something because there's a good reason to do it now, whatever it is, that's an okay reason. If you're doing it just because of what you did in the past, not a good reason in my book.
And maybe a complement to this at a slightly bigger scale, right? Deciding on whether to change careers altogether. It's something that I've struggled a lot with myself. I didn't just change fields. I was also considering to leave academia altogether. I even interviewed at a consulting company. I was thinking of going into Dutch politics, maybe do nonprofit work full time. In the end, I did come back to academia, but it was very close at some point. I think looking back, what kept me going was the people, which is what Yael mentioned. I think that's the social community, like geeky, quirky people. That's really my my type of folks. And then also the B would be that there is this core of like daily life. Not daily life. I would say the daily activities that are involved in the work that I could get satisfaction from, right? Like, for example, I really like collecting clean psychophysical data, and I really like doing some simple math to fit those data. And it gives me a lot of satisfaction that if a model fits well and it answers and it answers some small question in perception or cognition, right? So I can get satisfaction from sort of the small triumphs, right? Like maybe this is the one day at a time philosophy that if that joy hadn't been there, then I think it would be much harder for me to overlook the lack of societal relevance of the entire enterprise.
Yeah, just to briefly, like 2 sentence briefly, just from the grad student perspective of what Yael was talking about, because I recently did this where I had to go through the process of figuring out whether a research question that I was pursuing was failing to suit me because I was bored or because it wasn't working, and or like whether I just was incompetent. Like I went through that whole thing last year, I guess. And for me, what I did to kind of push through this was once I had the first like inkling of a feeling of, I think that this project is not on the right track, and I'm not confident that I know what's going on, I mentally kind of transitioned to trying to prove myself wrong experimentally, and just basically like collecting a lot of like basically just trying to visualize data in every possible way to prove whether I was right or wrong. Like I approached this like a scientist, I guess. But I think by like distancing myself emotionally from like, I won't be sad if I'm wrong. I just want to know the answer so that I can either fix the problem or abandon this project and do something fruitful. And then eventually, yeah, I basically did what it sounds like some of your grad students have done, where I was like, here's all of the evidence that this project is bad. and then eventually my PI made the decision that like, yeah, I think maybe we should switch directions and pursue a question that we're both more interested in that might experimentally make more sense for us right now. And I think that going through that whole thing was really time consuming and hard, but I feel a lot better now. So yeah, I guess just chiming in case there are other grad students who are listening to this, like it feels really good to let go of something that is not ever going to work. And yeah,
it feels like you're taking a burden off your shoulder, you know that it's a burden on your shoulders. Yeah,
it's just like realizing that sunk cost is a fallacy feels great. So yeah, that's all that I wanted to chime in before moving on to more questions.
One line remark on that. So my lab has a very, very big folder that's called abandoned projects, and they've been abandoned for many reasons. But in many cases, it actually felt really good to move the project from active to abandoned.
It's a good idea. I'm going to adopt that. So we need to finish up shortly, but I want to address the last two questions here, which is how to deal with PIs or program administrators or course directors who expect productivity in this time. And how do you keep high productivity or mentally feel able to when you're in a position when your PhD is ending and you're not being provided with any extension? So basically you have to keep high productivity because even though we're all at home, you're still expected to continue to work as normal. So again, no magic answer here, but I do think, assuming that these questions are coming from students or postdocs, I think as PIs, we do have solutions here or ideas, because I think once you when you're a student and or a postdoc, you're used to having large amounts of time contiguous to dedicate to a project. You can work on it all day, every day, etc. When you're faculty, that no longer happens at all. So we've had to learn to deal with this kind of situation where you need to continue to be productive in your main project, but you have maybe a couple of hours a week for your main project. And I just wanted to share one trick, which is well documented. It works. I can tell you I've been doing it in the last few months through a course that I took that forced me to do it, and it really, really works, which is to get a little bit done every day on a regular basis. So if you need to write your thesis, yes, you can't write for 8 hours a day now for all kinds of reasons. Maybe you have children at home, maybe just, you know, you're mentally not there, because who can write for 8 hours a day now? But you can write 1 hour a day, just 1 hour every day. And you'd be surprised how much you get done with 1 hour a day. It seems like, oh, I'll never be able to do it. You know, I'll never be able to finish my thesis in that way, or, you know, I won't be able to really be productive if I'm only like on task for 1 hour a day. But the truth is that hour is more than zero by far. And so I've been writing in the last 14 weeks, at least half hour a day, because of this course that I took that forced me to do it. And they plot the data for us. And at the end of the course, I was like, oh my God, that's in the end equivalent to a whole full day, like 8 hours of writing because I wrote half an hour to an hour every day, and I tried including the weekends, although I failed in multiple points. But that's like one whole day of writing in a week and a half. Whenever in my career have I done that? Like since I was a PI, never, I can tell you. Like I've gotten so much writing done just through half an hour to 1 hour a day. So I know you're maybe not used to working in this mode, but there's research on it. It totally does work. You get into the habit, like do it every day, preferably same time of day with the same cup of coffee and the same sofa, whatever, so you can really condition yourself to that. Like when you sit there, you feel like writing. But it will make you much more productive than you are if you wait for the binge time and for, you know, being in the zone. And so then, you know, going to your PI or program administrator or course director who expects productivity, they won't know that you're working only 1 hour a day, because you'll be more productive than now when you're just worrying about working all day and not doing even 1 hour a day. And it'll make you, for me, it just makes me feel good. Like I know I've done my writing. The rest of the day, who knows what will happen, but I've done my writing, I've done my thing, I've accomplished something every day. And just that feeling of, okay, whew, I've accomplished this thing. And sometimes it's at 11 p.m., but it doesn't matter. I know like I'll fit this half hour of writing, then I accomplished something every day. And actually yesterday I didn't manage to write. And this morning I woke up and I was like, oh my God, that was a complete waste of day. I didn't even manage my half hour. It really gives a sense of completion to do that small thing. And it does really lead to productivity. So that's my advice there.
My final comment is on sort of the overarching theme of many questions, which is like, what can we do more as scientists during these times, right? And in a way, I think that's too limited of a question, because we are not just scientists. We are also individuals. We have friends and family. We are citizens of a country. And sometimes in those capacities, in those other identities, we can actually do much more. So in my personal situation, so my wife is actually an ICU doctor in New York, and she's been working with COVID patients. But the best way that I could actually help her was amplify her voice by editing some of her writings that she posts online, right? So that didn't involve anything of my skills as a scientist, but it was still the most useful thing that I could do at the moment. And along the same lines, I think that amidst all this justified angst about PPEs and reopening, etc., sometimes we fail to see sort of the structural issues that are underlying how bad it's become in many countries. And in the US, at least, there are lots of things that are very structurally wrong, right? For example, that states and hospitals had to compete with each other for PPE, that the federal government and the White House, they have a lot of corruption in giving contracts, and they were extremely late and amateuristic in responding. So there's a lot to do in terms of policy and politics to prevent these things from happening in the future. And that requires political organizing and community organizing. And I think that's a much longer term view, but in the end, it's at least as important as making sure that first responders have what they need. And I think that we all can play a role in such kind of structural change. It's not just that we have to do anything particularly in our role as scientists, even though the voice of scientists is also underrepresented in politics. But I'm saying that maybe you can also think about what part of social change can you contribute to regardless of your profession. I think we should wrap up. It's been great, but we've already gone over time a little bit. Thanks everyone so much for joining us, for your questions, for your comments. Fortunately, we didn't get to everything, but we will look through the chat. We will take remaining points to future events. You are extremely welcome to submit more questions through the website. Future events are going to be held every other Friday, so not Thursday, Friday at the same time. And the recording of today will also be posted in case you want to listen back to it. Thank you so much. Stay safe.
Thank you, Celia, for starting this this line of thinking and answering and discussion. And I want to again send people also to Celia's original tweet, because there were lots of resources and interest in good answers there that we did not cover and touch upon. So there's a lot of material and also a lot of solidarity.
Yeah, I was definitely not expecting the amount of response that it got, but there were probably 100+ comments on that tweet at this point, and yeah, a lot of them were really interesting. I tried to retweet some of them, but I think I'm just not used to getting that much attention on Twitter, so I at one point just like panicked and shut off my notifications. But you know, I really appreciate you all reaching out to me. I think that this has been really informative and helpful, and probably worked wonders in terms of making people feel less alone. So thanks for organizing.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.